technology is wonderful. Okay, so, well, wearing another hat, I am moderating the final session today before we put on our dancing shoes and go and see Fred and Ginger. The last panel session is on the theme of future research agendas and international cooperation, but the panel members have also been asked to reflect on key insights from the work of the Cost Action Programme so far. As we've got just over an hour now, what I propose is that we begin with each panel member having no more than 5 minutes to pick a key insight and to suggest 2 priorities for future research. Then perhaps I'm quite anxious to open it up for a bit to all of you. So you can be thinking from now about key findings that you've been really impressed with and or future research priorities, because I'm going to open the floor to all of you. And I'd like to get some interaction. And then we'll finish off by giving the panel a chance to reflect either on the questions or comments that people have raised, or to have second thoughts or further observations. So roughly 25, 30 minutes for the panel to start off, about 20 minutes for you, and then 10 minutes to wind off. So if that's okay with everybody, I'm going to start. Let me just sort of work my way down from here to there. So we're going to start with Andreas Adel, who is from Population Europe. And Andreas, over to you. Have a microphone.
So I would like to start with the 2 points, actually, which I see as most important. The one is that the research should always be more interdisciplinary and more transdisciplinary. That's point 1. And the second point is, as I mentioned in the last session, I think we should be more courageous and more engaged with the economy and business sector. And I will explain a little bit on that in a second. I read the policy briefs, and I think they are excellent, and really recommend them for reading, because that's exactly what actually is a nice outcome of the COST project. So that it's very handy, it's very clear, it's very good, well made to show also what is more effective, less effective, no effects. So also the way how it has been done is excellent. And I think that's really important, that we deliver policy advice in that way. The second thing is that we should do this policy advice in a comparative perspective. And dashboards are a really nice tool to show how different parental leave schemes in the countries look like and what the effects are. So that could be a second thing. But the interdisciplinary thing, which I took from the last sessions, where we often talked about narratives, perceptions. So things where we should work much more together with other disciplines, particularly the humanities, because they form narratives, or are informed about narratives. Psychology, because they can tell you something about how people perceive the world and why they don't take up then or the offers they have from the society to take parental leave. So we should be much more open-minded to collaboration with other disciplines. And the third thing, that's my second point, is with the business sector. And I can tell you that we are currently digging into that field together with Oxford University and the Max Planck to elaborate cooperations with industries. It's a long way to go. You need to do a lot of lobbying, a lot of knocking on doors. And of course, you need to learn to think with the heads of business sector. And but the gains which we can get out of that is tremendous, because all of them are thinking about HR development. All of them think about how can we keep the brightest minds in our company or attract them to our company. And that, of course, parental leave scheme matters, and the way how you treat parents. One colleague this morning told us about this network of family-friendly business. So that's one way, but this has to be tailored down to the different levels of the economy. So it has to apply to small and medium enterprises as well as to Mercedes-Benz and Deutsche Bank. So, did I catch my 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Just breathing.
Okay. I thought, journalists are doing that breathing in order to stop you. Don't worry. Anyway, so I think we should. It's really an encouragement also to think about, if you think about data, not only to think about survey data and administrative data and geospatial data and social media data and digital track data, but also about consumer data, because the economy has these issues and they are well aware that family friendliness is an important factor to attract the brightest minds to their companies. So that would be my point on data, new data sources we should elaborate on. By the way, the government is strongly supporting that.
Thank you very much. If you just pass the microphone.
Yes, I do.
And the second speaker is Renzo Newmanitz, who is from Stockholm University.
Yeah, thank you. So when I prepared to be at this conference, of course, great thanks to the organizers for inviting me, I expected to come away inspired. And I did, don't worry. We've seen new data. There's an optimistic momentum for leave expansions in Europe. I've seen new data. We're broadening our understanding of parenting leave or care leave even more broadly. So there's reason to be inspired and even perhaps to be optimistic. But what I didn't expect is to come away worried. I wasn't expecting to be talking about threat wives and the manosphere and the rise of the radical right. I wasn't expecting the backlash that Jolanta from EGA was talking about. And that worries me. And I think we also need to think, therefore, as a research community and broader, but that's our job, the researcher, is how do we design parental leave programs, policies that are widely supported. And some of the answers, of course, relate, well, I don't have the answers, but some of those, the approaches come back to what we've been talking about before. We need leave policy, or we might broaden it, that is accessible to everyone, leave for all. That relates, of course, to the de jure aspects of eligibility. If we are growing more precarious, then there's larger shares who are not included, who are not eligible for our leave policies. But it's also, it's also de facto access to leave. Many people can't afford to lose 20-30% of their wage for a period of time, right? So there's that aspect to it. And I think we need to ask ourselves more difficult questions, like the model that we design, what families are supported, but there is a diversity in needs and perhaps preferences, and how well are we catering all those in a single model, which is a tremendous challenge. And this public support has been a key explanation in let's say, the success of the Swedish welfare state was. If many people, if the median voter can benefit from services and provisions, then support does tend to be higher. But I think this is also really relevant for what's happening within a workplace, for instance. It's not too difficult to imagine a workplace where some workers have better access to better rights than some of their colleagues, and what kind of inequalities, what kind of conflict or clashes might those instill. So I think we need to consider those inequalities and the consequences for support, and also support for parents who take leave to provide care for their children or for their elder, for that matter. And then that brings me also to the last point that is in line with what was said before about the employers. I noted that the employer side is not available here, and I think we need to think about what are the policy conditions that facilitate employers to provide leave, right? How do we finance it? What are the conditions? What are the regulations in that? And that might create political support from employer organizations, but obviously also the line managers who set the final availability for workers. And I think those might be important as well, also that workers feel that they're not penalized for it. So I come away inspired. Thank you. but also I'm worried. Thank you.
Move on to Paul, who's at Hamburg University of Technology, but I think we very much recognise the central role she's played in this post-action programme right from the very beginning. Thank you very much for everything you've done.
Yeah, I thank Margaret and Anne-Sophie for asking me to develop a proposal and helping me with that. So, talking about that, when we three talked about the title of our proposal we thought, okay, it should be something special, and the special what we brought in was parenting leave policies, or paid parental leave policies as we called it then, and social sustainability. So we wanted to have a new perspective on parental leave policies across Europe. We wanted to look at the gaps in research. We wanted to look at specific problems we've had before in parenting leave research, and wanted to ask ourselves how to tackle these. So social sustainability is a difficult concept for some because it's quite normative, you know, but fundamental rights are normative as well, so I have no problem with that. The perspective of social sustainability is somewhat looking at the present societies, but also looking into the future societies. So this is how the UN sustainability agenda is built, looking at present and future societies. And I wanted to ask the question, so how do parenting leave policies matter in this regard? So, and we've made some publications, have a look into it, we have some answers, and mostly we don't have, but I think there was a new terminology created, which is huge, I guess. So what I have in mind, what is in my head, and where I won't find a solution after all discussions are actually 2 points. The one is the thing with the Matthew effect. So current parenting leave policies are paid on former earnings. It was mentioned so often, I mention it again, former earnings for employed people in normal, so-called normal contracts, and some are left out here. This is one problem. The other problem is with the Matthew effect. We also have the problem that the welfare states give more money to those who already have more money. Yes, and okay, I don't need to tell what this means for people who have less money. I find this a bit problematic from my point of view, especially when you think of generating societies or having societies where you look in the future wanting more equality. Yes, economic equality as well, of course. So this is the one problem. The other problem I have is I do not understand why, for instance, in the EU directive on parenting leave policies or work-family reconciliation, why children aren't mentioned. I cannot understand it because I think children's future, children's well-being is at stake even more than parents' employment situation. So for society, so this is a problem for me. It's about what is giving worth to a society and what not, or less worth. So, and I hope this will be better in the future. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. We have heard many things today, and we can also see that research is really progressing. There has been also many things done within this project, which is really nicely to see at the end of the project. And what we can see is basically that care systems are under the pressure, and what we can also see is that policies are adapting really poorly to the changing realities, and we have some progress, but I must say that this progress and why children are not there, it's economically driven. And if we look at the EU level, but also in many countries, when we have improvements in leave policies or care infrastructure, it is framed as a labor market instrument or fertility rising instrument. And what is missing is really what Peter and Andrea has been telling. It's basically to value care in its own right, and I think there is where our focus should be more. We should speak more about care as a social right, and to speak more about care time for all through the life course perspective. And I'm really happy Peter and Andrea said most of the things I wanted to say on this point, but I will add one additional thing. When we speak about care through the life course, then the question of interdependence comes in, and here we have to think more how different leaves and other care-related provisions speaks to each other, and basically what are their implications. So we shouldn't treat policies only in silos, because people also don't live in silos. And also we have to think more about people who are facing multiple and overlapping care responsibilities, and think more whether existing care policy infrastructure can really respond to overlapping, shifting, but also dynamic character of care. So that's one of the points where we can dig more and try to understand things better, and then have also better policies. And the other issue is issue of inequalities, which has already been mentioned to some extent. One of the issues when it comes to inequalities is the issue of stratification that Tordis briefly mentioned. And here, I mean, we all know that policies are already designed to reproduce inequalities, and we have learned a lot, but there are still gaps in this knowledge. We don't understand fully what is happening in the context of deregulated labor markets, but also in the context of migrations. For example, even if you look only at Europe, what we have now, we have even in countries which haven't have migrants, they are now growingly having migrants, and the policies are not really responsive to that. And migrations, I mean, although they are primarily labor market driven, they're coming with family reunification, they're coming with people bringing their families, and then these people need also to access care-related rights, and the policies are actually tending to exclude those people, and not only through leave policy design, but based on their legal status in a country. And I think here we should speak more closely with migration literature. We have started to do something at my university working on this topic and trying to see basically what are institutional barriers and why migrants cannot access care-related rights, and basically trying to point out that we cannot build our policies anymore on nationally bounded populations because people are moving, etc. And our research needs to say more about that. And when we speak about inequalities, there is also another point Rense mentioned at the beginning, which is basically related to narratives surrounding care. And here I mean, one point is, of course, care as a social right. In recent decades, when we have improvements, as I said earlier, in policies, it was mostly through language of social investment. We need to increase the labor market participation, and we need to have more children, etc. I mean, on one hand, these goals are politically powerful, and sometimes we use them strategically to improve the policies, but we really should care more through its value. So basically based on intrinsic social value, and we need to talk more and research more on quality of care, the sustainability of caregiving arrangements, well-being, and I also have to say about the redistribution of care between the state and families. I think early feminist work was much more stronger on this point than we are today. And the other thing are far-right and anti-gender movements. This is something I'm personally very worried about, coming from Croatia, where these become quite strong. And but we can see that they are basically challenging gender equality, migrations. They also reject a human-based approach to care and reproduction. And we don't really understand what is happening here, and we have to dig deeper and to understand better politics of care, and especially how care policies are also mobilized by those actors to reach their goals. I will stop here, I think, but thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, being the last one, maybe you will allow for some repetition of some points. But I want to start with saying that my so I have one key insight and three items for research. But the key insight really is that when we talk about sustainability, just from today, but this whole network has been, for me, an experience of diversity, that we have diverse perspectives, we have countries that set this up in different ways with different problems and they are at different places in their history of parental leave. We have different aims that are important. We've talked a lot about fertility today, but not long ago we talked about labor market participation for mothers, for example. So I think it's, we have to see all this together, and parental leave really is one piece of a puzzle, but this piece will look very different at different times, and it will fit together with all the rest of the policy landscape and the landscape in general in different ways. So that also leads to that we have diversity with subgroups within a country, and we've heard here about inequality quite a lot. So it's not just parental leave and gender, but it's parental leave and a lot of other different subgroups, really. And this key insight of diversity that we all know about would lead me to the items for future research that I think are important to think about. And the first one is really about this diversity. It is diverse, and even if you're just interested in gender equality, you need to look at gender equality in relation to other inequalities, because otherwise you're stuck at this level. So for instance, in Sweden, surely it's very gender equal, but if we look at what's gender equal, it's the income, but it's the it's the fathers with low income that don't use the parental leave. So you need to see economic and gender equality together. It's the single mothers that cannot use the leave in the ways that coupled mothers do. So it has to be seen together with social inequality as well. And those groups that we see as maybe marginal groups, if we want to, in the general scheme of how the parental leave is set up, they're not so marginal anymore. They're growing with the diversity of society. So we really need to think of these other groups. Student parents, how are they dealing? Or single parents. I mean, there are many groups, same-sex parents and so on, there are not just marginal, but we need to look at this all together. So that's my first thing, that we need to look at this as a diverse situation, not just as one normative situation. This is how it's done and should be done. Because, of course, the parental leave is normative, but it's not very good at making this normative work, really. So we have all these different ways of having families today. Secondly, we have this EU directive that I think we need to speak more about, how it's implemented and what's happened with it. And really, this is a golden opportunity for all of us researchers to look at what happens with it, what happens with fertility, what happens with attitudes to gender equality, to the labor market, and all these situations. We know reforms matter, but how does it matter? How much? And with what time frame, long or short-term time frame, and for who does it matter? And do we have any backlash coming to us? All this needs to be studied very much now. So this is something we have to start immediately, or are doing already, but we need to continue doing it, definitely. My last point that I think that we researchers should look at is really, we talked about social sustainability, and this whole cost network has had the name social sustainability, but of course, just like equality, gender equality cannot be seen without social and economic equality. Social sustainability has to be seen in the context of economic and social and ecological sustainability. And we have not been very good in talking about this green part, or the ecological part of the sustainability. There's an emerging literature on social policy and green social policy, but how would a green parental leave policy look? I think that would change our thinking enormously if we start to think about this. We know parents and men and women in general, and I mean citizens in general, are thinking about the ecological part or the sustainability of the future in ecological sense. But what does it mean on the policy level? I mean, parental leave in most countries, or if not all countries, is based on an economy of economic growth. That's how it's funded. So if we start to, and this economic growth, of course, it leads to questions of, it leads to questions of funding if we start to question the economic growth of the whole idea. But of course, the economic growth has to do with labor market and the fertility and the replacement of fertility, replacement of the future workforce and so on that we have talked about. So if we start to think ecological, do we start to think about the goals of the policy as well in a different way? So this green aspect might make us see these goals differently, but I think the main hard question to crack here, or to think about in different ways, is how do we do this? How do we look at these goals differently without having new inequalities coming along and some benefiting from this, and not leaving other parts of the citizens behind? I think that's the main, very difficult question to think about. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. It's a bit like a relay race, this, isn't it? So I'm going to open this to the floor in a moment. What I noted down, and I know that hearing is always very selective, is issues for the future. I think were raised about diversity and more work on subgroups, and multiple care responsibilities as one example that I heard. The whole question of inequality, gender, yes, but many other inequalities. I suppose we're into intersectionality and those sorts of issues, and perhaps some new inequalities that will or are emerging. Social sustainability, obviously a huge amount to do there, but as we've just heard from Anne-Sophie, very important to understand how that relates to ecological sustainability. I have in my mind the thing I watch every January is I don't know if you watch the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, because this January they moved it to 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been to midnight since 1947. So we simply don't have time, and that's a combination of the ecological, in particular, of the biological, of the nuclear, and of the technological, and to which I would add care and neoliberalism as also very profound crises that we're facing. But so I think that issue of how we understand more about where social sustainability fits into the bigger polycrisis picture. We've heard about the need to perhaps to engage more with and perhaps do more work with employers and businesses. The interesting question of EU policy, which, coming from the UK, I'm always intensely curious about and envious of, that you should have that worry. At the beginning, we heard about the importance of cross-national work, to which I would also add how policymakers use cross-national work. I see cross-national work as being a provocation to thought. But there are other ideas about it, so I think it's very important, but also to know why we do it. And the importance of interdisciplinarity we heard right at the beginning. If I can just chip in with my discipline I'd like to see more connection with, it would be economics. And I don't mean the tired old economics, I mean the people who are working on imagining a new sustainable economics. In my country, for example, we have people like Kate Raworth and the donut economy. You have Tim Jackson and his work on prosperity without growth and the care economy. You have George Monbiot, the environmentalist, and also the New Economic Foundation. And I'm sure you have similar people in your countries. I think they don't necessarily link up enough with care and care leaves, and we need to link up more with them, I think, so that we are together thinking about what a new form of economy as care might actually look like. And my final point before I shut up is, if I had a choice about the future, I'd like to go more into the crisis of care, which I think is profound. And one of the things I would like to look at is the evidence from country after country that it's proving impossible to find people to work in care services. And this is, I think, due to profound structural and ideological changes that are going on. And I think, unfortunately, each country looks at itself and one type of service, when in fact it's a global and intersectoral problem. And we're running into a huge problem there. Anyway, that's enough from me. I look forward for, another 20 minutes of comments, suggestions, questions. Let me just see how many hands are going up to begin with. 1, 2... Go on, let's have a third. Three, yeah, right. So it's Ivor. And at the back, there was a hand. Yes, there and there. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, yeah. Please. Oh, you need a mic. One is rushing to you.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult for the hybrid people if we don't use the mic. 3 small comments. One on the companies and employers. Yes, of course, everything that has been said is correct. I wouldn't see them as enemies or so. I think they're still on the same side. But the challenges employers from time to time, especially the small ones, have is not to be underestimated. I mean, we are... some of our organizations, my own as well, there's a small organization, and I'm an employer myself. So if somebody comes and says, I want to have some leave, whatever leave it is, and I'm away, this is a challenge for us, for me, to find somebody. And when I talk to the new person that has to jump in, I have to tell that person, sorry, but you're getting a just short-term contract, which we call on the other side precarious. So there is a dilemma. And to take on this dilemma and to be honest about it, and to take those companies, especially what I would say the small ones, as partners and try to find solutions for this, I think would be really crucial, and not always say they are the bad ones, because usually those are human beings as well, and they really care about the families as well, but they want to have solutions. And the leave system is pretty established also in the companies, so they know what it is. It's different to have reforms on it and make them together than to find something completely different for them. So that's one. The second one is on the long-term policy, especially when we go into the ecological thinking, but also for other thinking. I think it's really important to be even more sure and more proactive when it comes to long-term thinking and the investment in the next generation and the generations after that. Now, Peter, you were just saying we don't have much time. That's true, we don't have much time. But on the other hand, we don't only have to look at solutions where we have the effects, not only the solutions for a problem tomorrow, but policy right now is also looking for the positive effects tomorrow. So we have to have the time and to have some investments for the next generation, which takes time and which might not be in this legislative period and which might not be positive for the next election, but we still need this. And I think we have lost this in the past 10 or 15 years, even more. So when we look at the results we have here, I think this is a general context we really have to fight for. And I think the third one, it is really good to hear that looking into those measures to see the dilemmas. I mean, we know parental leave is one good tool, a very good one, but it doesn't solve everything. And sometimes it even reproduces new problems and dilemmas. And to be aware of this and to look into this and to be honest about it, I think is really important. And at some point, it does get a political choice. So whether you want as a politician more the social equality, the gender equality, if you have to spend €1 for one or the other, at some point you have to choose. And all researchers can do is, well, providing the information what might happen, what could happen, and on personal note, maybe even what should happen.
Thank you very much. There was somebody, yes, a gentleman there. I'm keeping my finger pointed at you so I don't lose you. And then, is it Alison also? Yeah. So could you just say who you are?
Yes. My name is Artan. I'm a social policy scholar from Kosovo. So I wanted just a short comment on the topic of social sustainability. So, and your comment about the Matthew effect. There was a book from Peter Lindert a few years ago where he was arguing that we should do away with employer-centered insurance programs. Maybe we don't need them in the future, also to avoid the Matthew effect. But this concept of universal basic services would fit with the ideal of social sustainability. But there are some limits also to this solution proposal. I will take an example from a recent example from Kosovo. These countries are not so good maybe in terms of innovation, but they are good for testing grounds. There was recently a policy supported also by EU Commission to subsidize energy savings. And this was a universal package. But what happened is that in terms of ecological incentives to save energy, this was positive. But then families that saved most energy were those that had good isolation at home, and also big businesses profited from it because they spend a lot and the margin. So this is a limitation to this concept as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got Alison and then Anna. There's another hand. It's over there. Sorry, could you stop off on your way to Alison? Alison next, and then Anna. Yeah.
Thank you. Galine Maurer from Vienna. I I'm not sure. It was in the last panel you mentioned the caretaker, the care leave insurance. One of the speakers, and I see it as a kind of contradiction to what Peter and Andrea proposed in their book, Care Leave for All and Caring Democracies, referring to John Tronto. So I'm not sure. I think you referred to the private sector. So I'm not sure if I'm the only one who sees the contradiction. On one hand, I see the need or a demand in also taking in employers and the economy sector, but on the other hand, I still see this contradiction to refer to a private insurance or to insurance, to see care leave as a spot in lifetime, and the other proposal is to see to expand the lengths and to develop a caring democracy. It's just a brief remark on that.
Thank you. Then Alison, and then Anna.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. That's very stimulating and challenging. Anne-Sophie, I started with your challenge to us to consider sustainability in social policy, also parenting leave policies, but social policies more generally, to include the ecological and environmental dimensions. And clearly I would strongly endorse that view, having just written the book. But then, Renzo, you mentioned the policies that are widely supported, and that aspect, and you're sharing your worries. Ivana, you mentioned sort of focused on anti-gender movements. And what popped into my head was then, what about anti-green movements, and where do they fit? Because we're critiquing that social policies are not intersecting with green social policies as much as we think they should, but then they're perhaps facing similar backlash. So just an open question there.
Okay, and then to Anna, looking, are there more questions to follow? So did I see a hand? Yes, okay, so Anna and then over there, yeah. Sorry, Anna, just there, thank you.
In connection with the ecological debate, I just wanted to mention food. We never talk about food, but food and agri-food systems account for 1/3 of climate change and climate mitigation. And early childhood and these first 1,000 days have much to do with food. I am not sure. I am in a food observatory at my university. It's interdisciplinary, and we were in some discussion. I guess this is an hypothesis. Maybe it's the period of life with people consume more ultra-processed food, and I think food is a relevant element. And I also think that maybe we should evaluate consumption patterns in households, and how parenting leave policies make a difference in consumption patterns. You were mentioning mobility, also the consumption of pharmaceutic issues when children are sick, antibiotics. I mean, I think that consumption, and maybe to see what happens in households in consumption patterns, could be also, I don't know, one idea. This circular economy takes time. For example, nappies. I was just also looking at some research on the impact of the difference between nappies that could be reusable, I don't know, things like that. This was one idea, and the other one was, I am also concerned about backlash. This has been mentioned several times, and I think that we need to understand diversity of preferences, and also something that comes from the capability approach, the diversity in perceptions of valued functionings, and maybe understanding that would help us to better understand things about what people are concerned, particularly people under very stress conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a lady. No? Up the middle. Yes, just there. Thank you.
Hello, Sonja Dörfler-Bold, University of Vienna. I would like to add one point that hasn't been mentioned, I guess, and that's the role of robotics in care work as a future theme for research on care work and maybe also parental leave. It's just a remark, or maybe you want to add something.
Okay. Do you want to say anything more about that?
No.
No? Okay.
Not just that it's a point that gets discussed in Japan so, very, very much at the moment, or in the recent years, and I think that's something that is a point for the future to be discussed.
Okay, thank you. That's Joanna, just down a few steps.
I've been thinking about indigenous communities that was mentioned by Andrea as an inspiration for your book, and the way of thinking about not caring not only for people but also the environment and nature. That's one research gap, I guess, that we don't really know about. If I think about the indigenous people in my country, Finland, it's the Sami people, and they are actually not limited to one country. They live in the other Nordics, like Sweden, Norway, also parts of Russia. So it's we know basically nothing about how they what's the fertility rate of the Sami people, how they arrange their child care, what is the gender equality practices and situations, and so that's kind of one challenge for future research as well.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, right at the very back, just in front of the clock.
Just maybe very, very brief comment about there was I started with anti-gender, and now the concerns were raised about anti-green movements, and I think we are generally facing anti-science movement, anti-expert knowledge movement, and it's very difficult to counter these people who are speaking emotions and this basically spreading the messages based on fear, and so we are living in a very, very different reality when we have to counter these narratives, because for far-right movements, evidence, knowledge and expertise and science, it means nothing. They are just taking the scientific evidence and they are just misusing or abusing it in such a way that it's very difficult to counter them. And yes, anti-gender movements are blended with anti-migrants, homophobic, and all these kinds of fears that we could think of. And maybe the second thing, because the diversity and inclusion was mentioned at the table, what we are constantly facing is that when it comes to surveys, we are always having this issue of sample sizes. The more you start breaking down the data, because it was mentioned, yes, sex or gender desegregated data is not sufficient, that's true. But when we start break down the data, we come across this, we have very strong data protection, also regulation in the European Union. And for smaller countries, it becomes really very, very difficult to address it. One of the ways what researchers are also discussing, and I think very interesting to look at, is that maybe try to work a bit with the matching surveys, looking at different surveys. For example, if LFS and SILK, two biggest surveys in the EU, they are not really addressing care properly because they are addressing other issues like labor force or income and living conditions. And then we have time use survey, which is maybe more looking at care. We have, I guess, care survey. Try to kind of match, doing a bit of working with this experimental statistics and try to take the best out of it, to work on that, and maybe to explore a little bit more than intersectional also inequalities and difference within that. I think this survey matching exercise or survey and admin data is not yet used in a way that it could. I think it opens a potential that we need to explore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just see if anybody else wants to contribute before I ask our panel to give a few closing thoughts? Yeah. Well, thank you for those who have contributed. I think that's been a very useful exercise. I'm going to go around the other way and perhaps ask each of you if you have any either responses to what you've heard or final thoughts which you wanted to add. So I'm going to start with Anne-Sophie and work back this way. Anne-Sophie.
Thank you. And this one works now? Yes. So, yeah, thanks. Thanks. Really nice to hear what we're thinking about, that we're thinking about diverse things, but also similar things. I want to bring up this anti-gender and anti-green ideas. We think of those, and those are things that we are aware of. But to even think of an anti-economic idea that we don't even, that's kind of almost ridiculous to talk about in today. We're very far from a push away from having the economic arguments, the economic ideas as the foundation of everything we do. And I thought of it especially with when Johanna brought up the Sami people, and of course there's a clear conflict between economy and ecology in the north of all the Nordic countries that's very much affecting the Sami people with the reindeer herding or mines, for instance, and that kind of, it's a conflict, obvious conflict, and then you can talk about maybe a little bit of a pushback towards economy at least. But to talk about that for care, to talk about not caring about the economic reasons for setting up a parental leave system or so on, we don't even, it's almost ridiculous to think that we should have a system that's not economically sustainable, right? That's at the basic. So I think we need to see those things in a balanced way, and we need to see that we are actually needing to push back from the economic sustainability. There are other sustainabilities that are just as important in a way. That's more of that's a general just reflection. Okay. To also have an anti-economic foundations for everything we do. Kind of. That's what we're doing here, right? In a way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ivana, would you like to add a few final thoughts?
There has been so many things raised, so it's really hard to choose, but maybe I will continue on Anne-Sophie, because, this one is really tricky one, thank you. But I also think we are really deeply trapped into this neoliberal thinking and neoliberal narrative, and this is really preventing to solve the care and inequalities crisis we have. And I think you raised the issue of long-term thinking, and that's really difficult with politicians because they all think in terms of growth, economic growth, and I really like the Kate Raworth, I don't know how to pronounce it in British, thank you, the book, because she's questioning this old economics thinking, and basically we cannot have ever-growing society, and that we need to put things into the balance, and I think that's one of the main things we have to think. And I'm really worried about anti-gender, anti-scientist frames, because I can see this, they're really using science in a sophisticated way and basically putting it like relativizing all the knowledge we have, and that's really tricky, especially with social media. And one thing, when it comes to EU politics, somebody raised EU directive, and I think here we should really push EU to be more persistent on value of care, because now we have some kind of leaves, but most of them are really poorly paid, and also the EU directive, how it's written, it is written from the position of the average worker, so they are not taking inequalities enough into the account. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thordis, final thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. So let's stick to the economic thoughts or criticism. So I always think, okay, what is it, this full working day of 8 hours or more, this 40-hour week, who defined it? And it's challenged in Germany at the moment. They want more work per week from the employees. we are used to think about the timing of our week or the day in this from this economic perspective, and yeah, we have a partly solution in parenting leave systems where parenting leave can be taken in part-time, which I think is very interesting, especially for gender equality, if both parents take part-time parental leave. So maybe it's worth it to look a bit more at times and cultural and normative foundations of that one.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is real challenging. But thank you. Two comments also. The first, coming back to, or continuing on this point, I think you mentioned functioning under stress conditions. I thought it was a really good way of, a really interesting way of looking at it. And I'm just thinking for future research whether a sense of stability is a precondition for care, to open up people's minds and attention span and willingness, etc., etc. So then it's not just a macro level societal narrative of how to motivate our decisions, but perhaps also on top of that, or in addition to that, individual. And then regarding the data challenges of studying subgroup that Jolanta mentioned, that's very, very valid, which is the concern that you raise. You run out of people if you start looking at subgroups. But it is particularly true for surveys that are designed to represent the whole population or large parts of the population. So perhaps to do research in our fields, we need to reconsider how we do surveys and do more tailored to specific groups that we're interested in, to be and oversampling and those kind of techniques. I mean, there's disadvantages to that as well, but I think it's the right question to ask, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this really inspiring comments and questions. I would like to... Oh, this is really a mess. It falls down.
I've learned from the best.
Okay. No, I wanted to say something because I felt your frustration a little bit about that we are here amongst us and we don't touch too much the worrying situation of our democracies and the worrying situation of being challenged by anti-gender, anti-science, anti-democratic movements. I mean, we should not expect people like that to come here. They usually are in their own bubbles. And what is the main task which we have to solve is how we get into their bubbles and how we can inform them. That's really challenging. It cannot be the purpose of such a conference like this one. So we need really to think about how we, for instance, enter social media and how we come beyond the algorithms which usually sort out hate speech for them. So just to give you a little example, because we are currently working on a project for that, there's a theater group. They put a guy in front of an actor, in front of a microphone, and this guy cries into the microphone as the manosphere guys do, but then he changes the message. The trick is to make people listen to it, to make the algorithm sort it out, because the algorithm thinks it's a hate speech. At the end, is a completely different message. So we need also to adapt ourselves to these kind of communication styles. Otherwise, we will not reach these people. Very simple. Because they will, even if you talk to them, they will not hear to you. So you need to adapt a little bit to their communication circles, communication styles, and such projects. We should not overburden our projects with such kind of expectations, because I think we cannot deal with that. The second thing is the green question, the green family question. Just to give you another insight from what we had from our green family paper, you can find it on our website, is of course that the family is the place where kids learn how to behave in environments and how to protect environments and how to eat the right food, take the right nutrition. Of course, not during parental leave, then they are too small, but the parents are the ones which we can influence and make sure that they educate the kids in exactly those directions. I think that aspect is very important where we also can do something. And on the insurance question, which is really well taken, is not the first time that this idea pops up. It was already 15 years ago, that some demographers came up with the idea, if we work longer and we stay longer in the workforce, we could use savings which we have from the pension system to spend it during the time of our parental leave. Very appealing. So some British, some German demographers brought this idea up. So it was already a bit in that direction. And when you currently look into the public budgets and the discussions which we have in all the countries, in all the cities, that they want to cut down, they have to cut down. We have not that money anymore. So more and more these private savings come up in the health sector, in many other sectors. We say it has to be done also by a combination of private pension savings, for instance, younger generations, plus the state-funded pensions, so public-funded pensions, plus what comes from the economy. So all and everywhere this pops up. And I think it would be worth discussing it in that sense, to say maybe it's not too high expectation to say, okay, I can also put some savings. Whether insurance or savings on a bank, doesn't matter. And this brings me to the last point. Very often we think not really in economic ways. But as you know from Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. No? So at the end of the day, we can do that like that, but then we have to accept budget cuts because the money's not there. We have to think with that mind always, and always think about how does the economy function when we apply certain measures. Is that affordable? Is it manageable? What happens afterwards? Just to give you one example, which we had in Germany very recently, where the idea was brought up that we, with the experience of the Corona times, every business, in the business sector, the entrepreneurs would give €1,000 premium to people for the energy issue, so that they can afford still to come to work by car. They get €1,000 per month on top, so that they can compensate the losses they have in order to compensate for the energy crisis. It was disastrous for the government because the economy and the business sector immediately opposed that, because they said, what other burdens will you put on us? Firms are leaving Germany now to other places, and this will increase in the future if we get more and more burdens on which we cannot afford anymore. We are in a highly competitive economic situation. So for the government, it was really a blamage that they had to then take it back, the whole thing. So what I wanted to say with that is I can understand that people sometimes are keen to ignore the economic factors. They will come back. And so I would really advocate for taking that more into, and you will be surprised that all the people from business sector, which we are currently dealing with, are extremely open-minded to work with us. Demographers, social scientists, they also see the situation, the things they cannot solve themselves, where they need our evidence. So an encouragement also to go ahead with that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those final thoughts. Thank you all for your attention and your contribution. And I think that probably wraps up the day, except for somebody to tell us about the evening. And I see somebody coming.